good afternoon to our friends on the East Coast. I'm Father George Williams with the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, and we're delighted to have back for the third time Father Ragan Schriver. He's already been with us for two webinars, one on trauma and another on behavioral health. And he's going to continue his conversation from July on engaging with behavioral health issues in jail and prison ministry. And Father Schriver is the special assistant to the president of Catholic Charities USA. He works with them to provide mental health perspectives on various aspects of their network. And he began his work as a social worker and a therapist in an alternative sentencing program in Knox County, Tennessee. There he provided psychological evaluations in the county jail and individual and group therapy. He's the former executive director of Catholic Charities of East Tennessee, and he's a priest of the Archdiocese of Knoxville. So welcome back, Father Ragan.
Thanks. Thank you, Father George. This is a great chance to be with you all. I can't tell you how much I admire the work that you all are doing, and I'm just glad to be a part of this little service in whatever little way that I can offer. So as you typical of the last couple of times I've been with you all, I've got a PowerPoint that I would like to share. And so I'll just start off with that. And here we go. Is that clear to everyone, the opening slide?
Yes, that's good.
Okay. So I really wanted to just kind of begin by talk a little bit about, like last time, I think that I laid a few groundwork concepts around the concepts of behavioral health and mental illness, and many of you that work in the prison system, in these systems and these places, will run into and have run into in many ways persons that are dealing with a mental illness. And so I just thought that I would try to provide a little bit of a background or perspectives, or continue to do so this month, to kind of give a little bit of a framework. So at the end, though, I'm going to give hopefully 4 clear ways to help us better engage, like things that we could really, hopefully 4 things to really take with us. The first part is just going to be maybe hopefully some background knowledge to help us understand some concepts. So here we go. So basically, if we look, I don't know if, like last time, I didn't really talk that much about the historical perspective of understanding sort of psychological disorders. We have a long sordid history of trying to understand what psychological disorders or behavioral health problems really entailed. And so we go back and we kind of think that that people have demonic possession, or this thing called trephination, which I'll talk about in a second, or using exorcism or beatings, things like that to treat people. So some of these early theories, one of them includes this idea of trephination, which was cutting a hole in the person's head to let the spirit that was negative out of them. And so you can kind of see evidence of this in archaeology. You can see there's a skull of someone's head being cut off. So I feel like we have this long history of misunderstanding. And I feel like that even some of this same thing even is going on today. It's interesting that, like, again, kind of looking at the history, that here's this painting from around 1500, and this was when things were beginning to shift, and they were seeing that really thinking about the concept of mental illness as being more of an illness, an actual illness, that there was something going on, not just some sort of spiritual thing. So this painting really was kind of a cartoon, and it was sort of a lampooning the idea of cutting that trephination thing. So the woman with the book on her head is sort of an image of folly. That's interesting that was sort of a code for folly in this image at this time period. And then the guy with the kind of funnel on his head, that's sort of making fun of that trephination. So there was a definite shift and a sort of like a negative view, making a different shift. So we've kind of seen these shifts occur throughout our history of working with people with mental illness. And I know that many people, I think that you all are seeing that the biggest, probably the location where folks who have mental illness are being dealt with or being helped or whatever, are living, are in the prison system. So it's kind of a frustrating thing that in a way that we're not cutting holes in people's heads, but we're throwing people in jail for things. And so really, are we that much further? So I think it's up to us as ministers to think, how can we bring some of the best practice that we can into the best humanity we can into the system? So one shift that's been made is this concept of the medical model. And this medical model begins with like looking at physical illness and seeing how physical illness has impacted how people think or how their emotions are presented. And so we kind of go back to the 1800s, and when they discovered that some of the physical effects of syphilis led to behavioral health conditions and behavioral conditions that were leading people to behave oddly or to think oddly, and then become ostracized by the society. So this medical model, I think, as you all engage as ministers in the prison system, this is the model that you're going to hear from most likely. That there's going to be this clear model. So let me sort of explain it real quick. So, and I feel like sometimes just to say that this medical model can be a very square. This is A, B, C. It's it has parameters around it. It has real clear. But then sometimes we as ministers are going to come in with a circle that we see things more maybe in a more sort of holistic sort of way, and sometimes that doesn't always fit. So I think it's important for us to just recognize that this clash of a system that we might be dealing with, that most of the people that have are in prison or have interaction with the justice system probably have been labeled and dealt with and treated through a more medical model. So if I'm coming from a medical model, I see that really abnormal behavior should be thought of as a disease, and that there's a physical cause and a subsequent cure. So we think about these terms. Diagnosis. So really, I think people oftentimes, I know when I worked at the alternative sentencing program, that people would talk about themselves as if they were their diagnosis. Yes, I have this. I have this personality disorder. I have this mental illness. They would refer to themselves as that, and that would be the definition. Sadly, rather than I'm a human being that has this condition, that person first language, oftentimes I feel like I heard people referred to as the diagnosis first. And sometimes I would hear that among staff and even other social workers and psychologists and physicians that would be speaking about this. So the diagnosis is in the medical model becomes very key. Also, the concept of etiology, which is a fancy word for really what caused this issue. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about today, maybe some theoretical backgrounds on what some different etiologies, like what we think causes, and maybe therefore what we could use to treat some of these issues. So I think that's an interesting thing. And in the medical model, we talk about, well, what caused this? What brought this on? And then in the medical model, we also speak about prognosis. So you may hear terms like this when you're engaging with staff at a prison system, talking about, well, what's the prognosis? So here it's very linear. Here's a problem that led to this diagnosis, and then here's how it's all going to unfold. So kind of predictive. So, but then I do think as ministers bring in a more holistic view. So I'll talk a little bit more about that and how do we interact better with this medical model sort of perspective. Another part of the language that's used in this medical perspective or medical model is the concept of comorbidity. And there are sort of two ways to look at the comorbidity, that this is when there are two behavioral health conditions that are occurring at the same time. For instance, anxiety and depression often come together, often comorbid with one to the other. There's two different ways to look at comorbidity. One could be where there's an index condition. So say, for instance, a person has a schizophrenic spectrum disorder where they have thinking and hallucinations and delusions and things like that. And then maybe because that's going on with them, they feel alienated from other people that they're in relationship with, then that might make them have some sort of experience of depression. So the index condition may be the schizophrenia, but then depression may be a secondary comorbidity to that. But then you could think about another perspective of that things are just sort of co-occurring together, that there's depression and anxiety, that there's maybe substance use disorder and depression that might be coming along with that. So the two things are occurring, not really like one leading to the other or one impacting the other, although they would impact and would engage with each other, but one maybe didn't lead to the other, as in the cases where might be an index condition. You also might hear the language about dual diagnosis. And again, this is something that we feel that occurs, we find a lot in the prison system because so many people are often maybe probably unjustly put into prison because of some sort of drug offense or some sort of sale or whatever, or some sort of trouble that exposure to substances has gotten them into. So then that's a big issue with this issue to consider. So with this whole medical model that I'm kind of referring to, that there's different ways of classifying. So the United States is not the only one that defines behavioral health disorders or mental disorders. The American Psychological Association has the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that I kind of showed you a little bit of last time we were together. But then there's also this ICD, the International Classification of Diseases, and that also classifies the mental disorders. Then other parts of the world, like the Chinese classification, Latin American, and then there's other different types of definitions and understandings. But the one that's primarily used in the United States, and the one that you will hear diagnostic terms come from, would be the United States use of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So again, kind of utilizing this medical model to think about, and I kind of put this. I think this is I shouldn't make fun because it's a tragic thing, but I love that image from the movie Young Frankenstein, where Igor finds that he gets the wrong brain for the surgery that the doctor's going to do. Well, some of these things to think about when people are looking at how do we understand that there is a mental illness within the person, and there are three things to think about. Deviance, which I know is a negative term, but again, kind of coming from this concept of the medical model, that somebody is, their behavior is out of the norm. So if we think, well, most of the people behave if we look at a bell-shaped curve, like a curve of statistics, like most of the people are clustered in the middle, then the deviant behavior would be behavior that's outside of that normal curve. So there might be behavior that would be outside of the typical way of behaving. Maybe inappropriately expressing emotion when things are really funny to experience sadness, or when things are really sad to express laughter, or maybe talking to themselves when that it's not socially acceptable to do that. So that's where the deviant sort of term comes from. Then dysfunctional, and again, these are such labeling negative terms, but this is kind of where we're coming from this perspective. So this dysfunctional, where it's utilizing behaviors or engaging in behaviors that are not very adaptive to the situation in which the person is in. So that can lead people to maybe engage in issues that might be contraindicated to the law from the area where the person lives. So this kind of dysfunctional behavior can lead persons to interaction with the justice system, all because they're suffering from a mental illness. And then thirdly, distress. Does the deviant behavior and the dysfunction lead to the person to experience distress? Is there sadness and angst about the way that their life is being lived and the way that they are behaving and responding? So these three things are kind of the three ingredients to think about how is a person experiencing a behavioral health disorder, is that they're outside the norm. Well, lots of people act outside the norm and they wouldn't be considered to have a behavioral health problem. But then when there's dysfunction, well, there's lots of people that are maybe not completely functional in the system which they are. But then when their person is experiencing distress, that's an important element to really look at. And I think this is kind of, I like this because it's using this medical model to be able to say that we're listening to the client, that we're hearing what the client or the patient's concerns are. Okay, so let's spend just a few minutes talking through a couple of maybe some of the major perspectives or theoretical perspectives that help us understand what's behind some of these behavioral health conditions. And you may hear some of the terms in some of the ways that I'm going to sort of show these theoretical perspectives. You may hear them coming from the providers that are supporting folks in the prison system that are dealing with behavioral health disorders. And maybe you might hear your own, like maybe something you never knew, that you might be coming from a certain theoretical perspective and you didn't know it. And so maybe you can kind of connect with one of these perspectives. Okay, so here's the first and probably the oldest, the psychodynamic approach. This approach views people's struggles in the behavioral health arena as coming from struggles in the development of the human person. There may have been trauma, there may have been poor attachment, there may have been difficulty in the family life and the development of the person's personality structure. And so in that history then, the person lives this out, and then when they become old adults in society, then there may be these internal conflicts because of the difficulties at different points through their developmental history. So there are these internal conflicts that cause the personality structure to have behavioral expressions that are maladaptive and difficult. So that's just in a nutshell what psychodynamic view would be. It comes from the origin is from Sigmund Freud, this psychodynamic, and we've, of course, much of what he said we've realized is not exactly evidence based. We don't have a lot of research around it, but we see that some of the concepts and ideas have bared out to be true and to have some real evidence behind it. So it's important for us to listen to and pay attention to from this theoretical perspective, to hear people about their background and about their history, and to have them from a theoretical sort of cure standpoint, although we don't really talk much about cure, we talk about being in recovery. If there's sort of a developmental, if there's a sort of a cure perspective, it would be helping a person to find insights about, to understand, I react in a negative, depressive sort of way when I hear this sound, or when I respond in this way because it reminds me of negative things that happened as a youth. Or maybe I have an insight into something new. So sometimes as ministers in this sort of situation, maybe you might be coming from a more psychodynamic type of approach into allowing the person to share their life with you, share their history with you, and then allowing them to have insights into understanding themselves, like what got them into this situation, how did this happen, what can I do to better understand myself. So this psychodynamic view is kind of self-exploration and understanding things and uncovering things that maybe I didn't know that were in my background, or that I was thinking about, or behavior that I didn't know really maybe expressing some internal drive or internal difficulty. So that's psychodynamic, okay? And you can think maybe you might connect with that a little bit. The second is actually in history. Look, this is the sort of the theoretical perspective that came right after the psychodynamic view, which is sort of a definite reaction. The behavioral view does not care about what happened in your childhood or in your development or in your internal personality structure. It's basically about things that we have learned. If there's habits or thoughts or expressions of feeling that I've learned how to do because of the environment that I've been rewarded or punished for certain behaviors or certain expressions of my life. And so this is something I think that we see in the prison system quite a bit, at least from my experience, is that they take this behavioral view. If I punish the person, then they'll change their behavior. That's coming from this kind of perspective. If I lock someone else, then they'll realize the error of their ways. Or if I do this to them, then they'll alter their behavior. This is a very much of a behavioristic type of approach. There's certainly a lot of evidence about this. But I think that we've learned that human beings are way more than just a dog that's salivating when they see food or whatever. That we're much more than that. We do learn things. There is a behavioral response to that, but that's not the whole picture. But this is one perspective I think that you might hear a lot about when you're engaging with the prison system, is this concept of the behavioral view. Some people do continue to follow this. Now, this is the humanistic approach, which is another development in the history of the development of understanding the human behavior. Is that really the idea is that I am a developing human. I have a goal of reaching for some form of self-actualization, as we all do. And that there are points in our history when there's been a block to that development, where maybe because of trauma, because of poor relationships when I'm growing up, or because of poverty, or because of maybe drug addiction or whatever, that I've felt a block in my development towards becoming fully actualized. So sometimes when we are blocked from that full actualization, then we get kind of stuck, and we can't develop, and then we end up doing things that maybe might be that kind of dysfunctional, or might not be the best to my human development. So then we lead to poor self-appraisal, really low self-esteem, doing things to try to hide that self-esteem, or to try to boost the self-esteem with other things, other behaviors. So this is this issue. We think about a theoretical cure here. This is, the theoreticians say, that it more is an unconditional positive regard, that we recognize the dignity of that person, recognize their possibilities are endless for that person. How do we treat that person in that way? What are growth opportunities that they can engage in? So I feel like when we're ministers in a prison system, to look at, okay, here my life is very, very limited as a person who's in prison, and how can I recognize my ability to grow? What areas can I grow in? Can I learn a new thing? Can I read a book? Can I exercise? Can I do something that's giving me a little bit of self motivation? Then I can maybe alter my appraisal of myself, my negative self view, and then be able to see myself a little bit more positively because I'm able to do something that's growth oriented. And doing so with you as a minister or us as ministers, to be in their corner, as to say, and be positive about their approach. Okay, then there are just two more approaches here. I'm not going to go on forever. But then one is, I think that we've already discovered, and we talked a little bit about this last week, is the biomedical view. And this is a bit more from the medical model, but I feel like no matter whether we're taking psychodynamic, behavioral, humanistic, or whatever, I think that we have to recognize that there are biological aspects to this, that there are brain abnormalities or brain differences in persons who have behavioral health problems. There are neurotransmitter differences. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a second, but this is a big one, that where medication is utilized often. But I feel like that to give someone a medication is an essential part of the picture of a person's recovery, but also so is a sort of what we might call a corrective relationship, like that maybe that you could provide as a minister. Just come and be with the person and be with them and talk it out with them and hear what their struggles are and stuff. I think that's another important element in this whole process of recovering from mental illness. Okay, here's the last kind of sort of perspective I wanted to provide, is more a cognitive view. So cognitive view, or cognitive / behavioral view, that we would say is that maybe oftentimes mental illness is caused by a person's irrational thinking, irrational thoughts about themselves or their situation. Like, I have to be perfect, and if I can't be perfect, then I might as well be a complete failure. Either, like, you might run into this a little bit in the prison system with folks, to hear them say, well, I have to I have to fit in, or I have to be exactly what the other people that are living here, what they want me to be, and then I have to be that, and then that becomes an irrational thought. It becomes reinforced. So then the role of the curative factor is to turn those thoughts around, or stop negative thinking, and to help the person kind of redirect that in a more positive way. So I feel like that's a role for a minister too, is to kind of like frame things, help the person that you're working with frame things a little bit differently. So maybe you all could think about, what are some of these theoretical perspectives? Do you hear them in relationship to some of the services that maybe people you're working with are receiving? Do you see any of these 5 perspectives as one that you kind of attach to a little bit more than the others? That might be something that you could think about and reflect on. Do I find myself a little bit more humanistic? What am I, in this? It's kind of interesting. So we think about all this, and I think it's important to think that no matter what perspective we come from, our language really matters. The way we refer to people, the way we talk to others is really important. So this word about sanity, I think that you might hear this sometimes when you're working with maybe legal staff or staff that are in the prison system. Well, he's insane. Well, that is not a word that we use in our relationships with people, because we don't think of someone as being insane. But the legal terminology for it is insane. So if somebody is maybe committed a crime because of, but then there might be a behavioral health element behind it, then they might use the defense of insanity. So really, we don't like to use that word of insanity or crazy or something like that. We like to talk about behavioral health conditions and people with conditions, not they are a schizophrenic, or these people are a bunch of schizophrenics. We would say persons with the schizophrenia spectrum. There is something important to think about, the dangers of psychological labeling. And there was a study that was done a few years ago, or well, it was in the 1960s, that's a long time ago, where this guy did a study where 7 people expressed to a medical provider that they had auditory hallucinations. So these people, they expressed it once, and then for the rest of their time, they were placed in hospitals or placed in care of doctors. But the people that were their providers continued to see these patients in quotes, as having behavioral illness. So they interpreted everything that they saw as being conditions or symptoms of the behavioral health illness. Well, that's the last thing in the world that we want to do. We want to be able to accept the person as they are, not as their label. like, I know maybe I'm getting a little preachy on this one, but I think that if somebody comes to us and we find out somehow that they have a diagnosis um, of schizophrenia, I keep using that one, that like of schizophrenia, that we don't want to see everything that they're doing as connected to just that label. What we want to do is see the person as they are, fully as the human that they are. And I think that that's a big point. So I had 3 slides about this. That's too much information about this Rosenhan study, but it just does bring that out. Okay, so I've given these individual theoretical perspectives. You may identify one more than another, but it's important to think about that it really is not just one linear way of thinking. It's very much of engaging all different elements. That psychological problems come from biology, from psychological influences, and from social cultural influences. It all comes together to bring about whatever condition that a person is struggling with. We can't look at it as A causes B equals C. It's A and A1 and A2 and maybe a little bit of B that might lead to C and Z and Q, like all kind of coming together. And it's a complex thing. All of us are complex people, and we have different perspectives that we come through from. And so that's what's going on with a person that has a behavioral health condition. So we have to remember that. There's a thing called the diathesis stress model. And this is a concept where somebody may be born with a biological precondition to expression of schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, some of these behavioral health disorders. But it's important to think about these in relation that they may have this pre-existing condition, but then there's some stressor in their life, a social context, or maybe some psychological relationship that occurs in the person's life, and that can then help or bring about the manifestation of a behavioral health condition. So we call this that there's this predisposition to the vulnerability. We call that the diathesis, and then some sort of stress or life experience that brings about the expression of the behavioral health condition. So we've talked a little bit about the DSM, so I won't go into that. But what I want to think about is, all right, I've given you some of this diagnostic stuff, some things about medical model, these different theories, but then really looking at it as that it's a combination of factors that lead to behavioral health conditions. So what about us as ministers in relationship to working with folks in the prison system that have this a diagnosis or have some condition? So I want to say, what is PI? Well, PI is person in environment. So we are folks that don't just look at the person in head-to-head kind of conversations when we're working in ministry with people. We look at the person within the environment. Where did they come from? What was their background? It's important to hear that from somebody, to let them share their story with you and what's been their experience and what's been their background and how has life been for them so far? How are they reacting to the current situation in which they're in? Because living in a prison like that is a different experience, and so it can be a difficult experience, and it can form or shape behaviors in a certain way. So I think it's important to recognize that this environment in which they're in is impacting them right at the current moment. So that's really, really important to think about. And then I think it's important to think about when we relate as ministers to the persons who are in living in the prison, then how are we relating to them, and how is that kind of a puzzle? What part are we playing in relationship to other staff, other providers, or other people that are working with them as well? And what are we bringing to the table? And hopefully we're not bringing the same old, you're a diagnosis, you're sick, you're dysfunctional, whatever. But I'm bringing to you, as I understand you as a fully human being, that I want to be here to support and be in relationship with you that's unconditional and positive for you in that way. So I think that's kind of an important to think about. So with this little slide, let's look a little bit, well, we could talk more about the biological stuff, but let's talk a little bit about how do we engage? So how do we engage? So I feel like we can't talk about ministry without, from our perspective, talking a little bit about Jesus. And so when we think about Jesus, we see that when he saw the crowds, or when he engaged with people, he proclaimed good news. Hopefully that's something that we're able to do for our clients. I feel like that the folks that we're working with in the prison system are often hearing bad news all the time. There's just, I feel like, bad news all the time. And I feel like oftentimes surrounded by a lack of stimulation that's positive. So you think about things that you see during the day, different colors, different experiences, the sunset, the sunrise, all the things that we see outside of a prison system. But when we're in, it's the walls and the same people and the same situation. The stimulation is very difficult. So how can we bring good news in that we're bringing a different stimulation to the person? Are we bringing something, a positive expression? Oh, I noticed something positive about you. I noticed something good about you today. That we're starting with the strengths, kind of like we talked about the last time. So I feel like proclaiming the good news is really important. And if we do so, we're following Jesus's thing. Healing every disease and sickness. Well, that'd be great, but we can't do it we probably can't heal everything like Jesus did, but we sure can play a role in this. And I mentioned this term before, the word corrective relationship. A corrective relationship is something where a person finds healing by sharing themselves and being accepted by another person. This is an important part of being human. Is not worrying about what other people are going to think about me, or what's this person how am I going to do this for them, or whatever, but to think, how can I really be truly my authentic person, authentic self with this person? So I feel like that's up to us to think about how can we allow that person to be who they are and express their concerns and their worries and their fears and their joys with us. And that is a healing process. That corrective relationship is a healing relationship. And I feel like that compassion. You wouldn't be in this ministry if you didn't have a great deal of compassion and willingness to be with people. So I think that's a great thing. Okay, so I like this kind of statement. The claim that Jesus is the truth must be demonstrated in the Christian idea of attending to human pain and suffering. So I feel like that even though I've just said the deal about looking at bringing good news in a way, I think it's important to acknowledge the struggles that people are having, or the sadness that people are having, or the difficulty that people are having, to acknowledge that and let them express that with us. So here's 4 things that I kind of want to say. Our 4 aspects of engagement with the folks that we're ministering to. First, that we're Christian. We're grounded in the ministry of Jesus and the person of Jesus. It's holistic and systemic. It's respectful of culture, and it's collaborative. I know I only have just a few more minutes to talk before we open it up for questions, so don't worry, this isn't going to take forever to go through these 4 elements. So first of all, I want to say that it's Christian. What we're doing is primarily grounded in Christ. And I think we could look at what you're doing as being really kind of connected to the story of the Good Samaritan, that image that's there. I like that image of the Good Samaritan story. And I think about this when I think about the Good Samaritan, that people that, like the priest and the rabbi or the Levite or whoever they were, that were on the road and they passed up the guy on the side of the road, they were under the misconception that the practice of their religious faith was only happening in the synagogue. They didn't want to make themselves unclean by touching somebody that had blood on them. They didn't want to be late for the service that they were headed to, or whatever it was. They saw their practice of their faith as only in the confines of the temple or the synagogue or whatever they were going to. And they didn't see the practice of their faith as being on the side of the road. Well, obviously, you all do see the practice of your faith being on the side of the road there. You're there with the person. You're being the Good Samaritan to the people that you're dealing with. So I feel like that's the important thing to remember, that the practice of your Christian faith is in the prison building that you're in, or in the situation that you're in with the folks that you're working with. That's where really our practice of our faith can be and is. Okay, the second kind of thing when I think about engaging with folks that are maybe incarcerated, to think about it as holistic and systemic. Now, this is where sometimes we can sort of maybe might be that round peg in the square hole with dealing with a medical model sort of system, like a prison system or a hospital system, to think about that we're bringing something different here. God's creation reflects a whole interdependent sort of mix of the way people live and the way systems are and the way things are. Even if you just look at inside the human body, like the little image that's on the screen there, that there's all these different parts to the body that work together to make us functioning human beings. It's the same with persons, all kinds of persons outside of us. So there's this system that we're in. So we're all about looking at trying to address basic human needs and all this because we believe in the different systems that we're engaged in. So if we think about the systems theory, that we think about maybe like a family, that we think about a mom and a dad in your classic sort of family way. And if they have three kids or whatever, then sometimes the mother plays a role, the father plays a role. What role do the children play? And how do these different roles come together to make the family function? Well, you think about a person within a prison system that's living within a prison system, they have to play a role. So it's interesting that when we think about this process of the systems approach, that there's homeostasis, disequilibrium, and adaptation. So homeostasis is when everything's fine, everything's just kind of even keel and things are kind of rolling along. Disequilibrium is when things kind of get turned upside down and things are kind of out of whack. But adaptation is when you begin to adapt to the out of whack system, and then the system evolves a little bit. So like the ultimate example, or the one we always use, is that maybe if the Earth was to turn into, blow up or something like that, that would affect the gravitational pull of the rest of the universe. So there would be all these changes, but then the adaptation would be that the universe would then begin to be under a different pattern there. So the same thing happens for us when we think about human beings. Maybe I'm living my life as best I can. The disequilibrium comes when I get put to have to live in prison, and then the adaptation is that I adapt my life to this environment in which I'm in. And that's kind of the core of what this systems theory is, that all these external things are impacting me, and then therefore I'm going to adapt to that system, whatever system it is. There are lots of different systems that are interplayed. One major system that I think that we think about here, when we look at all these different systems that folks are engaged in, is also the issue of not only politics, economics, family, all those things, but also the way that our society treats racial issues. To think about how that there's a great deal of prejudice or a great deal of inequity that occurs. And so that whole cultural element is really important to think about when we're thinking about the systems that a person is coming from. So I feel like if we can always, when we're dealing with our people that we're working with in the prison system, to think about them as not just the individual, but an individual that's worthy and dignity and value and created by God, but within this larger system that's been impacted. And how are they adapting to this new system? How is the disequilibrium of being placed in a prison setting, how have they adapted to that? And how are they living that? And how does that affect their self-esteem? How does that affect their self-concept? All those issues. Then thirdly, two more to go, that the respectful of culture. I think that this is a really important thing. Here's three different images of Mary and Jesus. And so they come from clearly very different people and very different perspectives on Christ. And so I love that because Jesus comes in many forms, and the presence of Christ is there in a lot of different ways. So the way that I see Christ may be different from the way that maybe one of my clients might, or maybe the understanding of God in this world is. And I think that's so important, to let the client to accept that, to hear that and accept it as the person is sharing it with you. So I feel like culture is a really important element, to have a cultural humility. That's the word I like to use in relationship to this, is that I fully don't understand what it's like to be you. You're the expert on you. And so let me learn from you in your experience as of being a human in this place where you are. So I feel like that's a little bit of that cultural humility concept. And then the last idea that I'd kind of like to talk about for engagement with clients that are persons that you're working with in the prison system is collaborative, that it's mutually empowering. So what we're doing with the people that you're working with, I think if I come in and I feel like, here I am, I'm a minister, I'm representing Jesus, way to go me. And then I come in and here's this person that's a patient, that they've got a diagnosis and they've got this and they definitely need my help. Then that's just setting up an up-down, an imbalance in power. The person just reinforces the idea that they're sick or that there's something wrong with them. But I feel like if I can lock arms with my client, or I keep using the word client, I'm sorry, that's coming from this social work thing. If I can lock arms with the person that I'm ministering to and say, this is a mutually beneficial relationship. I want to walk with you into a new way of being, or to understanding things in a different way, or with this corrective relationship or whatever. That we just walk together with the clients, with the persons that we're ministering to. I think that's the important thing. It becomes collaborative. And if I'm truly collaborative, then I am allowing myself to be impacted and to become a new person, as well as allowing the person in this corrective relationship that I keep talking about. So I think these four things: recognizing my role, what I'm living Jesus's life in the best way that I can. I'm his Christ's hands and feet. The second, that I'm really coming at it holistically and from a systems perspective. Thirdly, that I'm going to be humble before the person that I'm working with. I'm going to hear their story, their experience, their life from their perspective, and I'm going to try to honor that as best I can. And then in doing that honoring, I'm going to lock arms with them and be united with them as we kind of move forward. That it's not up, down, it's not me as the minister, you the poor person that needs my help, but it's us as human beings together, all created in God's image, trying to make the world a better place. So those are just some of the concepts or ideas that I had. And I don't know if I think there's some things in the chat, but I don't know if there's some questions that we could talk about that maybe I could provide a perspective on. I could certainly talk a million times more, but because I know we have some time to be able to talk about questions and stuff. So if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. Thanks, Father George.
Yes. Thank you, Father Schriver. This material is so valuable and important. I know from my experience working with in prisons for nearly 30 years, how we really need to be able to use the language of our colleagues in mental health and work with them and not work against each other. And often there is sort of I think the result of people who were untrained or ignorant of what the mental health people were doing, a lack of trust on their part, and also on our part, perhaps not open to what they're trying to do. And so I think you really present such valuable information, and I'm glad that this is being recorded so people can come back to it. I would also encourage you all, as Father Schriver said, to use the chat feature if you have any questions specifically. And I guess I have a question, or maybe something you might want to talk a little bit about it, in that as we're focused on the behavioral health of our people in the prison who we're ministering with, how would you suggest we monitor our own mental health and our own behavioral health? Because we're not able to help anybody if we're not functioning properly. And I think it's important to remember how toxic the prison and jail environments are to us as ministers. So any thoughts about that?
Oh my gosh, I feel like it's like, when you go, I don't know if you've ever been out at the lake or at the beach or something, and if you walk on the edge of the water, you're gonna get wet. So like that, it's gonna splash up on you because you're near the water. And I think it's the same thing with working with people, whatever system that you're engaged in. So I think if we're engaged in that prison system, it's going to splash up on us, and it's going to kind of stick with us in many ways. So how do we integrate that? But then how do we not let it just weigh us down or pull us down? I feel like that's the big question. And I think that for me, the big thing is, do I have outside friend support, that like maybe people and things and activities that have nothing to do with prison ministry? Can I go to somebody like for myself? I like playing tennis. That's kind of a thing for me. So like, for that hour on Tuesday evenings when I play with my friends, all I care about is getting that ball over the net. I don't care about anything else I'm doing. So I feel like if we can create that for ourselves, or even just like little mini vacations through the week, like if it's playing a game, it's playing checkers, whatever it is, to kind of, I'm focused on that checker piece. Another thing, this is just from my own personal experience. When I worked at that alternative sentencing program, I did find that it splashed up on me. And I remember like leaving oftentimes at night, feeling weighed down and feeling like I was struggling and feeling like I didn't know how I could deal with it. So I started doing this thing. I found a certain chair in the hallway on the way out, and I sat down and I took a deep breath, and I, in my mind, imagined the persons that I'd been working with, and I kind of imagined them being put in a little, I know this sounds silly, but like a little box where that was velvet and it was comfortable and they were safe. And in my mind, I closed the box and I put them there. They were safe, they were comfortable for the time being. I can't do anything about it because they're there, and then I'm going to leave and go. So somebody gave me that idea to do a little guided imagery for myself as a little ritual when I left and transitioned back out into the my daily life from having been inside. So that I feel like that kind of a guided imagery would be a great little thing, or some little ritual to kind of like mark the difference of I'm leaving this place and now I'm going out to where my life is. I feel like that might be a really good thing to do if there's something to create. So those are my two suggestions. Well, three maybe. Recognition that it's splashing up on you, because it will, and then what kind of like little could I ritualize my departure from the maybe the prison, the jail, into the rest of my life, and how can I, so that I feel like there's this demarcation, and then also am I creating places and spaces in my life where I'm not thinking about it, I'm thinking about something pointless, like getting a tennis ball over the net or something.
Great. Somebody has a comment here, a question. As a chaplain, many inmates value the fact that I can offer them pastoral confidentiality. Sometimes, though, the things shared with me are the same things that are shared with mental health workers. So, any thoughts on the role of confidentiality as it pertains to us as ministers?
This is a good question. I think, in fact, I'm a teacher, so I was just teaching this morning about that. We were talking about this and different roles of this, the role of confidentiality. I think that, well, each person, each of you probably all have very different, maybe experiences. So it might be very unique for you in each case. But some things that are blanket are the importance of that I can be trusted. I would imagine that the people that are living in the prison would feel like maybe alone or isolated, or feel like they just need somebody to express a vulnerability to. So I think to be able to create that safe place for folks to say, yeah, this is your place. You can talk to me. I'll keep confidential. But I think it's important to let people know from the very beginning. If you say that you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else, I'm going to need to really let that'll be the only reason that I would need to break our confidentiality. I think that to me, I think letting the person know ahead of time what your limitations on confidentiality are, and then the person won't feel violated, and then they can make a self-determination on what exactly they want to tell you. So I think that's an important thing. But I think there's just these two important things from that question about the importance of creating a confidential space where the person can be vulnerable, and be weak or questioning about whatever it is, and not be what you want them to be, but also, or what anybody else wants them to be, but also that I think to pre-warn in a way. Like these are the areas where I can't continue to be confidential. I need I would need to share if you were going to hurt yourself, or if you're going to hurt somebody else, and I got wind of that. We would need to break the confidentiality for that. And I think I don't know if that makes sense, but those are two, I think, things to really consider: the importance of it, because you create this safe, confidential place for the person, but then also letting them know ahead of time what the limit
I think
is.
that's important. And the idea of our duty to warn in case of somebody threatening self-harm or harm to other people is important to always keep in mind. And we don't automatically have the kind of confidentiality that I would have, say, as a priest in a confessional. So if you're going in as a volunteer, you're not covered by the seal of the confessional here. I mean, you need to use common sense, but also always be attentive to if the person is expressing any kind of self-harm thinking or harming other people. If the person even suggests any kind of suicidal thinking, you need to take that absolutely seriously and convey that to the mental health people in your department. You can't. That's not something that you are necessarily, or you should be trying to handle by yourself as a minister. That's life and death issues here. Another question I would have, kind of following up on what you were talking about earlier, Father Schriver, in terms of self-care, is how do we deal with the staff? Because my experience is that the prison staff, the correction officers, the wardens, they are dealing with the same environment that the prisoners are, and they are often trying to deal with their own demons in their lives. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think just my thought on this, that like I feel that that many of the staff will be going through that whole idea of you're going through the water, that the water is going to splash up on them, and that they're going to be struggling too. And so how can we be sort of maybe a little bit of a voice for them, or a bit a colleague to them? And I know sometimes I feel like, this was my experience, this is just me, just in this one place where I worked. Sometimes I would be offended by the things that the staff would say about the persons who are living in the jail, that treat them like, oh, these people kind of thing. And I feel like that sometimes that's a way of protecting themselves. If I see the clients that I'm dealing with that are suffering, if somehow I make them less than human, or that it's their own doing that brought this on, then I am less likely to be brought down in sadness to that. Did that make sense? That like so then that's when sometimes I think I'd have to realize that the staff aren't just people that view humanity negatively. This is a self-protective thing that the thought pattern or speech pattern that they're kind of engaged in, and how just to recognize that. And maybe we could bring a little bit of humanity in a way to the staff person, to say like, this is such an important thing, to recognize their humanity. And how are you struggling? How do you deal with this? Maybe helping them have somebody to just have an ear to as well. That could be just as important and just as beneficial to the people who are living in the prison, as the people who work there. If you're kind and good, and maybe create a good safe place for the staff person, then maybe you're making it better for the people that live there as well. That's just a couple of thoughts that first come to mind, because I think that we as humans, we want to do whatever we can to help people, but also we want to do kind of sometimes build up that armor to protect ourselves, and then we start thinking in ways that might not be that helpful. So it's just good to be there for each other, I think.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Another person asks here, makes an observation that in hospital settings, there's some responsibility to share information with the care teams that might help them understand and treat a person more holistically. In a hospital setting, we're talking about patients. Is there any needs in the prison system to share with others, say comparable to a care team, who are there to care for the prisoners?
I think that might be a thing that you could, I think that might really absolutely be helpful. So if you hear something like, I don't know, a person's struggling with this or that, or they're really, whatever the situation might be, or maybe maybe they're expressing to you some symptoms of depression or symptoms of anxiety, and maybe it might be better for them to see, the behavioral health professional, or to see the physician to get a prescription of something. But I feel like it would be important, if you've made it clear that I'm going to be confidential, our conversations are confidential, unless you're going to hurt yourself or hurt someone else, then if you feel like something's coming up, to get the person's permission. That's part of that lock in arms. I feel like we shouldn't make the decision on what other people need to know. I think that if you said to the client, I keep saying client, I'm sorry, if you said to the person that was there, and you said, hey, what you're telling me sounds a little bit like X, like sounds like maybe some of the staff might benefit from knowing this about you. Can I have your permission to share that with someone else? Then they know that you're keeping the confidentiality. Because if it ever got back that you sort of told somebody something, and then they figured out, wow, the only person I told was the minister, and now everybody knows. So that could destroy the relationship. So I feel like giving as much power to the client, because they have such little, I mean, this is a blanket statement, but I feel like there's so little choices that a person can make when they're living in a prison system, that if you can give any little bit of choice to the person, to allow whatever, have some autonomy for the person and create that could be a healing thing too. So I feel like, hey, what you're saying to me is this. I feel like it would be beneficial for the counselor on your ward or whatever to know this. Would it be okay if I shared it with the staff? And if they say yes, then great. If they say no, then I think I would respect it. That's my take on it. Of course, your situation may be very difficult, not difficult, but different.
Mm-hmm. My experience is the two biggest issues in prison are among prisoners are substance abuse and trauma. Any thoughts on dealing with those huge issues?
Oh my gosh. So here's 5 more webinars, but like here at the end. But I do think, we talked before once when I was with you guys once before, we talked about the role of trauma. And I just think that that the more we learn about the body's physiological response and what the brain is doing in response to trauma, we do things that are dysfunctional, are deviant, and are distressful. I mean, that's to try to protect ourselves. Things that were really super adaptive for myself when I was being abused as a child, or being or suffering at the hands of another situation, that I still apply those same survival tactics in the system that I'm in now. That same thing happening, that's trauma. That's kind of that reliving of the trauma that our body is still doing. And so I just feel like that is happening in the prison system now. And I feel like the more we learn about this, if I could just give a book if you're interested more about the trauma thing, it's the book What Happened to Me by Bruce Perry and, well, Oprah. So they write this book, and so it's really her kind of interviewing him throughout the book. It is outstanding in helping us understand trauma from a real user-friendly sort of perspective. And then substance abuse too is a brain issue, and is of course is one of the disorders that we talk about. So I feel like looking at it from that perspective is helpful in helping people know that the empowerment that they have. And I feel like that participating with others that are in recovery, I think that's important. We could talk about the substance use issue for a long time. And oftentimes substance use and trauma histories are so tied together. The more adverse childhood experiences someone has, the more likely they are to have a substance use issue. So these things are all there.
Yeah, and along those lines, one of the problems in the prison system that we have is that the trauma continues. It's a traumatic environment, and it keeps reinforcing and creating new trauma. And there's all kinds of substances available. I'm always amused at the flack I would get from bringing in altar wine, an ounce of altar wine, when I could probably buy a ton of crystal meth, 100 feet from there. So
right.
It's just crazy. But just to be aware that you're in an environment of constant re-traumatization and full availability to substances for people who are addicted. We're running out of time, and thank you again, Father Ragan, for this wonderful overview and this rich material. I think I'd like to give just a quick announcement of some of our upcoming events. On Thursday, September 23rd, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have a town hall, and it will be, the guest speakers that day will be from Fortunate Families, led by J.R. Zarkowski, and the topic is Catholic LGBTQ plus ministry. How do we, as Catholic ministers, minister to the rather larger than you'd think, LGBTQ population in the prison system? And then on October 13th, our next CPMC webinar, like this one, will be again, same time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And the topic for October being Respect Life Month is looking at anti-racism as a pro-life issue. And our speaker that day will be Andrew Leike, and he is a nationally renowned Catholic leader, and former director of the Office of Black Catholics in the Archdiocese of Chicago. And we'll have flyers on our website, catholicprisonministries.org, along, of course, we will post this webinar shortly. And again, Father Schriver, I want to thank you so much again for this, your third time with us. Just a wealth of experience and information, and I think everyone who was here today learned a lot, and this will benefit all of us, especially those who we are attempting to minister to in the name of Jesus. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thanks. I'm honored to be part of this network, and I pray for you all and the work that you do. Thank you.